Today, we're jumping into the work of theologian Abraham Kuyper to explore a pretty radical idea: how a 16th century faith, one that we often think of as strict and rigid, somehow became a powerful engine for political freedom. Now, this quote from historian George Bancroft really sets the stage. On the surface, it just doesn't seem to add up, right? How could a movement so focused on doctrine also be a fanatic for liberty? Let's get into it. So this is the big question Kuyper's lecture really tackles. And it's more than just a history lesson. It's like he's trying to reverse engineer the source code of Western freedom itself. Okay, here's how we're going to break down his argument. First, we'll look at the core root principle. Then how that applies to the state versus society. We'll pit it against two competing sovereignties, see how it leads to liberty of conscience, and wrap it all up with a final question for us. Okay, so let's get into it. Where does an idea like this even start? Well, Kuyper says to really get it, you have to look past the specifics of church rules and grab hold of the single most fundamental idea it has about how the universe works. And that idea is the sovereignty of God. Now, what's so fascinating here is that Kuyper presents this, the idea that one single divine authority rules over absolutely everything, not just as a religious concept, but as the actual cornerstone for a political philosophy. The logic is, if that's true, then any authority here on Earth has to flow from that one ultimate source. Right, so this idea of God's sovereignty, it isn't some abstract thing that just stays up in the sky. Kuyper argues it actually radiates outward, creating two very different and sometimes conflicting realms of authority right here on Earth: the state and society. Let's start with the state. And this is a really crucial point. In this way of thinking, government is not the peak of human achievement. Actually, Kuyper sees it as a necessary but, well, a fundamentally unnatural invention. See, his argument is that if there were no sin, humanity would have just been one big, organic, global family under God's direct rule. So the state, with all its laws and police and armies, it's a mechanical fix. You can think of it like a splint on a broken arm. It's an emergency measure designed to hold things together in a broken world. It's not the ideal. So if the state is just this mechanical remedy, then where does real life, actually happen? Kuyper's answer is pretty clear. It's not in government. It's in all these different organic spheres of society. And this right here, this is the absolute key to his whole vision of liberty. It's an idea he called sphere sovereignty. Basically, it's the concept that different parts of our lives, our families, our work, our art, they all operate under their own authority, an authority that comes straight from God, not from the state. Think about it. The family operates with its own rules of love and loyalty. Science is driven by what Kuyper called the sovereignty of genius. Art has its maestro. Each of these worlds has its own integrity, and the whole point is they shouldn't be run by politicians. And this quote just paints such a clear picture, doesn't it? The state's job is to be a referee, making sure these different spheres play fair and protecting the weak. But what it can never become is an octopus, strangling the very life out of society with its tentacles. Now, to make his point even sharper, Kuyper basically puts his theory in the ring against two other giant ideas that have shaped our world, both of which put the ultimate source of power right here on Earth. So you can see the contrast. He's up against, first, popular sovereignty, the idea that the people are in charge, and second, state sovereignty, the idea that the state is the be-all and end-all. For Kuyper, both of these are a huge problem because at the end of the day, they make your individual conscience answerable to other flawed human beings. And that, he says, is a recipe for state overreach. And he says you can actually see this play out in history. He draws a sharp line between the American Revolution, which he points out grounded its claims in a higher power, nature's God, a supreme judge, and the French Revolution, which was built on the idea of neither God nor master. For Kuyper, where you start, that starting point, leads to totally different kinds of freedom. Okay, so this brings us to the final and maybe most important piece of the puzzle: individual freedom. How does a system that starts with the absolute sovereignty of God end up protecting the individual? Especially when, and Kuyper himself brings this up, you have this history of persecution, like the execution of Servetus in Calvin's Geneva. Well, Kuyper makes a really bold argument here. He says that all that persecution was a holdover, a relic of the old system of a single state-run church. The truly game-changing idea within Calvinism, he says, was that the true church isn't just one single organization.
It can exist in lots of different forms. And if that's true, well, then the state has no right and really no ability to decide which one is the right one. And that, he argues, is the logical path to a free church in a free state.
And this all leads to a really crucial distinction he makes. He contrasts the liberty born out of the French Revolution, which, in his view, is just the freedom to go along with the majority, with what he calls Calvinist liberty. And he defines that as the sacred, God-given right for every single person to follow their own conviction, their own conscience. So, after this whole deep dive into history and philosophy, it's not just some academic exercise. It leaves us with a really sharp and relevant question for our own time. Because at the end of the day, Kuyper's whole argument really boils down to this. Where do we believe ultimate authority comes from? His point is that how you answer that question fundamentally defines what freedom even means. Whether you place that final sovereignty in God, in the people, or in the power of the state itself, that choice changes absolutely everything that follows.